In 2010, when we were all excited about the iPhone 4, a scientist named Peter Turchin published something that should have terrified us. He predicted that the 2020 would bring a major political crisis to Western democracies, not because he had a crystal ball, but because he had math. He was right about the pandemic chaos, the protests, the Capitol riot, all of it. And here's the scary part. His model says we're not done yet. Hey everyone. Today we're diving into something called Cliodynamics, basically the mathematics of why history keeps repeating itself. Peter Turchin, an ecologist who became a historian, claims he can measure societal collapse the same way we predict population crashes in nature. And before you dismiss this as pseudoscience, remember, he called 2020's chaos a decade in advance, down to the year. So let's talk about what his models say about where we're headed and whether we can actually break these cycles. Turchin says every society follows the same pattern, driven by three variables: population pressure, economic inequality, and political instability. When these three align, you get the same result every time: rebellion, collapse, rebirth, repeat. Here's how it works. Population grows, resources become scarce. The elite class expands, but there's less pie to go around, so they start fighting each other. The state can't manage the pressure. Crisis hits. System collapses. New system emerges. Rinse and repeat. This isn't speculation. He's tracked this pattern through Rome, Chinese dynasties, medieval Europe, the Ottoman Empire, France, Russia. Same story, different costumes. Arnold Toynbee said it best: civilizations aren't destroyed by external threats, but by internal disintegration. Take Rome. It wasn't the barbarians that killed it. It was elite Romans fighting over diminishing resources while the population suffered. The Ottoman Empire, same thing. The Tamar system collapsed when too many elites wanted land grants that didn't exist anymore. China's Tang and Song dynasties, bureaucratic bloat, elite competition, peasant rebellions. The pattern is so consistent it's almost boring, which makes it terrifying that we're following it right now. Turchin calls these secular cycles, 200 to 300-year loops. America's current cycle started around 1780 with the Revolution. Do the math. That puts our crisis period right about now. But here's what's clever about Turchin's approach. He doesn't just look at big events. He measures weird stuff to gauge societal health. The size of elite homes. When rich people's houses get absurdly large while everyone else struggles, that's not prosperity, it's decay. Child skeletons in graves tell you about nutrition and healthcare access. When people trust gold under mattresses more than banks, your financial system is failing. He even looks at agricultural data. Declining soil fertility isn't just an environmental issue, it reflects a society out of balance with its environment. Abandoned fertile plains, like we're seeing globally, signal systemic failure. The scariest metric? Bureaucratic document density. When governments produce mountains of paperwork, it's not efficiency, it's a system so complex it's losing touch with reality. Sound familiar? Every form needs 3 forms to explain it. Every department has a department to oversee it. It's organizational cancer. But there's a shorter cycle that's even more relatable. What Turchin calls the father-son cycle, roughly 50 years. First generation experiences devastation, war, revolution, economic collapse. They value stability above everything. Second generation grows up hearing these stories, appreciates peace, works hard to maintain it. Third generation, they grow up in comfort, never experienced real hardship, don't recognize danger signals. They're ready for conflict again. Germany's the perfect example. First generation lived through World War I's horror. Second generation experienced economic collapse, desperately wanted stability. Third generation, Hitler's youth, had no memory of real suffering. They were ready for someone to promise greatness again. Consequences be damned. America follows this perfectly. The 1960s-70s were chaos. Vietnam, riots, Watergate, economic crisis. The generation that lived through it valued stability. Their kids, the Gen Xers and older millennials, heard the stories, stayed relatively cautious. But the generation coming of age now? They've known nothing but relative comfort. They're angry about inequality, skeptical of institutions, ready to tear down systems they see as unfair. This isn't about blame. It's about patterns. Every third generation thinks they're different. They're not. Now add Kondratiev waves, 40 to 60-year economic cycles, named after Soviet economist Nikolai Kondratiev. New technology drives growth, investment flows in, economy booms. Then innovation stagnates, returns diminish, crisis hits. Steam power and railways drove growth until the 1870s crash. Cars and electricity powered the early 1900s until 1929. Post-World War II manufacturing boomed until the 1970s oil crisis. Computers and internet drove growth from 1980 until, 2020. Notice the pattern? Each wave ends with a crisis that requires fundamental restructuring. We're in that crisis phase now. Productivity growth has stalled, inequality is at 1920s levels, the middle class is evaporating. The 2008 financial crisis was the warning shot. The pandemic was the trigger. If this historical pattern recognition is making you rethink current events, hit that like button and subscribe. Comment below. Do you think we can break these cycles, or are we doomed to repeat them? Because I genuinely want to know what you think. Back to that 2010 prediction. Turchin wrote that America was heading for crisis around 2020. Inequality increasing, elites clashing, trust dissolving between people and rulers. He published this in an academic journal, not some conspiracy blog. What happened in 2020? Pandemic exposed every weakness in our system. George Floyd protests showed racial tensions at breaking point. January 6th, literal attack on the Capitol. Political polarization so severe, families stopped talking. Trust in institutions hit record lows. Inequality reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age. He didn't predict the specific events, he predicted the conditions that make such events inevitable. Like a seismologist doesn't predict exactly when the earthquake hits, but knows when pressure is building on the fault line. And here's what keeps me up at night. According to his model, 2020 wasn't the crisis, it was the beginning of the crisis period. These periods typically last 20 to 30 years. We're potentially looking at instability through the 2040s. The big question, are we doomed to repeat this forever? Turchin says no, but only if we understand what's happening. Previous societies didn't have data science. They couldn't see the patterns. We can. We can measure inequality in real time, track social cohesion, monitor elite competition. We have the tools to see the crisis coming and potentially prevent it. But knowing and acting are different things. Reducing inequality requires elites to give up power. Preventing elite overproduction means limiting access to elite positions. Managing population pressure might mean rethinking growth-based economics. These aren't technical problems, they're political ones. The real test isn't whether we can see the patterns, it's whether we can overcome human nature. Every previous society thought they were special, different, more advanced. They all followed the same cycles anyway. Look, I'm genuinely torn on this. Part of me thinks Turchin's onto something profound, that history really does follow mathematical patterns we can predict and maybe prevent. Another part wonders if we're just seeing patterns in chaos, like finding faces in clouds. But even if his model is only partially right, the implications are staggering. We're not special. We're not immune to history. The same forces that collapsed Rome and the Ottomans are active right now. The question isn't whether cycles exist, It's whether we're smart enough to break them. Turchin says the biggest disaster isn't that society faces crisis, it's that we were warned and didn't listen. Well, consider yourself warned. The math says trouble's coming. What we do with that information might determine whether future historians write about our collapse or our transformation. What do you think? Is history really cyclical, or are we imposing patterns on randomness? Can we break these cycles, or is human nature our destiny? Let me know below, because honestly, I'm not sure which possibility scares me more.